welcome to probably the most exciting panel of the day, the regulatory landscape panel, implications for consumer-centric businesses. As Theobald said, I'm Kathryn. I'm a compliance and regulatory lead at Stitch. I've been at Stitch for just over 2 years. It's been a wild ride. Definitely love it and have massive privilege of moderating this panel today. I think as a way of introduction, touching on some of the things that Sylvester mentioned earlier in the sessions was based around inequality and how unequal our economic landscape in South Africa is for South Africans. I think that something we really want people in the room to understand is that there's a different type of consumer that we're considering that's not necessarily mentioned by Stitch. I'll get to that in a bit. The SARB released their payment study report. It was based on 2023 data, very, very prolific report, and they had some really interesting insights. Number one was that 56% of all payments are cash. That is an incredibly high number. It's massive. Then obviously all the rest is digital payments, but if you're looking at what they kind of categorized each segment into, you had the digital adopters, 33% willing to use digital payment methods. You had the digital rejecters, 36%, those that have absolutely no interest in digital payment methods. That's going to be fun on the recording later. It's all good. And then we have the excluded. This is probably the harshest one to read out. It's 31%. Those that have no interaction with technology platforms or digital payment methods due to structural or financial barriers. So I think when we're speaking about our third annual Stitch Scale Summit and we're considering the consumer, there is also that consumer we would like people to consider, and it's one of the biggest drivers for the SARB at the moment for the 2025 vision. With that said, hugely appreciative that we have members from PASA, the FSCA, Webber Wentzel, joining us today. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. I can take a break.
No problem. So, hi, everyone. I'm Shanice. I come from PASA, and I am part of the research and strategy team there. Largely what I've been doing is a lot of the modernization work, and more recently, I've been leading a lot of the work in terms of FATF Recommendation 16. So both in the local environment as well as engaging with the FATF in the international spaces.
Hey, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Nolwazi Hlophe. I'm currently in the Fintech department of the FSCA as a senior specialist. Currently, our hands are full. We're currently conducting research. I just closed off research in decentralized finance, and we're conducting research in artificial intelligence within South Africa. And we're also conducting research in open finance. We've just published in March our policy recommendations on open finance. And we still have a big scope to go forward with as we look for more innovations in the financial sector and what they mean for consumers and market conduct. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Lerato Lamola. I'm a partner at Webber Wentzel specializing in financial regulatory law. So I spend a lot of my time advising startups all the way to multinationals on retail banking, consumer credit, payments, what you would call fintech, but what we call disruptive financial services. So I spend a lot of time advising businesses either how to fall into or fall out of the regulation, depending on what they want to do.
Cool. So Shanice, now that you can't get away, where is the liability shift for digital wallets? I'm kidding. Don't worry. Cool. So Janae and Sonda kind of touched on the Pay by Bank product that Stitch has. It's one of our original OG products. I don't know if everyone here knows, but Pay by Bank is by design an open finance product. It's built around data, and any open finance product is a data product. So my question is for Nolwazi. I know you worked extensively with open finance. One of the critical promises of open finance is financial inclusion. However, digital literacy in South Africa remains low. How do you ensure open finance doesn't further exacerbate financial exclusion?
Oh, it's a tough question, eh? But yes, you're right. One of our barriers to open finance is financial exclusion, and this is due to low digital literacy in South Africa. Actually, a study I read mentioned that of all South African citizens, digital literacy is particularly low in students and learners, which is quite worrying because they're the new generation that's ushering supposedly new technology. And one thing I think that can be done to mitigate this, obviously, has to start in the young ages, but this has to be a governmental action, the businesses as well as the regulators. A three-pronged approach of the education of the students and the learners, but not excluding other consumers as well. Like at the FSCA, we have a consumer education department that makes a point of making sure that we educate consumers on basic things such as fraud or their data. And efforts like that can go into improving digital literacy. But I think, though, we cannot ignore it. It is a risk, even in open finance. We acknowledge that in our research. But we do mention like the consumer education thing that we have. But that's not enough because the quality of the content is great. But as the FSCA, we can't do it alone because the quantity is the problem. Because although you may have a great program structured, if it's just going to reach the four of us, what good has it done? So we need to come together as with the government, the regulators of different specific sectors or segments of the financial sector who are involved in open finance, and the businesses also involved in open finance, like you, Stitch, need to also stand up and educate your consumers, educate your customers what they're actually involved in because of the risks that are included in open finance activities. So that they know that if they have informed consent, what exactly does that mean? And they're not just sharing your data with you because they think they're just getting a benefit, but they don't understand what it truly means. Thank you.
If I may add, from a payments perspective, we've also seen things, we've talked about Brazil. The growth in instant payments and real-time payments in Brazil was largely due to consumer education. It was a core pillar of their Reserve Bank's strategy in implementing this payment system and gaining the adoption. That being said, I think an important element that we're missing in from consumer education is a lot of the education sits with the schemes. So introduction of PayShop, everyone in this room is very, very well versed on it. But you go out into the general market and a lot of people still don't know. So the same thing would be done for here. While we have a very limited role as PASA to play in this consumer education space, I think it's important that the consumer education is driven from the people that own the products, whether that is the scheme, whether that's the rail owners, whether that is the product owners like Stitch.
Yeah, I think us educating our own consumers around Pay by Bank would be a little bit redundant because they already know how to use Pay by Bank. I think it's fintechs, the e-commerce sites that use it probably should also participate in that. So when you're looking at a card option, you understand exactly what Pay by Bank entails. But this is a little bit of a question, feel free to answer it. If you can't, then it's fine. But what about the 31% of South Africans who don't have access to technology to be able to participate? How exactly, what is the strategy there? What should fintechs like Stitch do to get them involved in the payment ecosystem? What can we do?
I'm not sure yet about South Africa if we could consider this, but back when I used to work at the Central Bank of Eswatini, what we would do was we would have drives, and we would drive to the areas where there's no digital anything. And we would go and give the education in those areas by teaching and giving visuals like a poster or a big board. And we would go out and have those consumer education drives so that we make sure that even that grandma who lives in the middle of nowhere knows what it's about. So perhaps that's something that we could explore even for here in South Africa, to make sure that no one is left behind. Because we really are concerned, because with us it was for mobile money, making sure that everyone understands what mobile money is about. Because it has grown very big, large, to be very big in Swaziland. Whereas here in South Africa, especially with open finance, because we need explicit consumer consent, it would be very key to educate the people, because the products do bring real benefits to the consumer. I've heard all day about the different products, from Stitch to Bash to MTN and what they're trying to offer, and so on. And so, apart from the responsibility just being passed on to the government and the regulators, even the other companies that I've mentioned now, you also have a responsibility to get into your bus or combi or truck and drive to that old woman and tell her about what is open finance.
Can I jump in here? Yeah. So I think in South Africa, obviously we have the digital literacy issue, then we have the financial literacy issue. It's a multidisciplinary solution that's needed. So it's not just one side or one sector, right? It's the finance sector, it's the consumer sector, it's the education sector. So it is going to require a multidisciplinary type project to deal with it. But one of the seeds that I want to plant in a lot of the businesses that are here today is, even if we look at Vision 2025, right, and the ambitious plans that the government has for modernizing the payment system, a lot of those solutions are going to require multidisciplinary teams to implement the action plans. And the one thing you guys have mastered is being able to communicate with your consumer. So all of you, if you look at your business, you don't have the same type of consumer, right? It could be, if it's, your consumer could be a mom, or it could be next gen, or it could be whatever your consumer type is, but you have mastered how to communicate with that particular consumer. And that information and the techniques that you use to actually get in front of that consumer is what the public sector needs. So it's about sharing the skill sets. There is a particular skill set that you have mastered, otherwise you wouldn't be successful businesses. The public sector needs that same skill set to educate the broader population and to deal with some of the challenges that we have around financial inclusion, digital literacy, financial literacy. So I think it's about a cross-selling of skills and getting in front of each other and having those type of conversations.
Yeah, I think it's also crossing into data protection. A lot of people don't know about how to protect their own data, what their rights are. That's also a massive undertaking. You also consider it if you're looking at AI. AI, again, it's data. Garbage in, garbage out. It's machine learning. It's an incredibly exciting but also slightly scary product. So Lerato, this question's for you. Globally, several countries are looking at AI regulations, with the EU AI Act recently being pushed out. What elements of international AI regulations should South Africans look at? What is relevant to South Africa? What are you seeing that's happening on a global landscape, and how do you adapt it to South Africa's unique socio-economic space?
So I think from a regulatory point of view, South Africa is still very early in its journey. We've had 2 documents published this year, where the one was the AI planning discussion document, and then the other one was the AI framework. As far as I'm aware, both are still open for comments, even though there was some confusion when the documents were initially published. But I think for South Africa in particular, we just first need if I were to put it into pillars, so one, we need a skill set, so actually developing the skill set within the country, transparency, We need ethical AI guidelines. So how do you ethically use AI within your organization? Infrastructure. I think across the board, we have very serious infrastructure gaps that would need to be addressed. And then going to that point of data and data protection, and for me, if even just touching on open finance, who owns the data, right? Because I think, again, if we look at regulating consumer-centric businesses, one of the main questions we get, at least I get from clients a lot, is, yes, I want to be involved in open finance, but I still want to own my data. I don't want to give my data, you know what I mean? Because there's so much IP in that data. So these are some of the things that we need to think about. Is it going to be voluntary or is it going to be mandated? Because both regimes have a very different look and feel to them depending how South Africa chooses to go. And I'll leave it to my colleagues to say whether voluntary or mandated is better.
She can either confirm or deny.
Just thinking about how other countries have been regulating AI and looking at the things on there, they've been all following the OECD AI principles, and these are countries like the EU, the US, Canada, Japan, Korea, and Singapore. And we know the AI principles are based on fairness, human rights, being democratic, and also transparency and explainability. And so when you're thinking about all of those principles, they analyze them under voluntary and mandatory. I think it definitely leans more on the voluntary leg than the mandatory leg, in the sense that if you're being fair, how can you force me to just give up my data? But you see that they also adopt a risk-based approach. They adopt an approach that is also tailored to the specific context of their country, one that is sector agnostic, but at the same time, within each sector is specific for that particular sector. And so these countries are displaying that there can be harmony because they also, what you said that about the private sector also giving skills to the public sector, the regulators have been collaborating with the private sector towards developing their regulation along with international cooperation, so that this is beneficial to them to get the skills and the knowledge from the private sector to make sure that their regulations are fair as well. And so when you're thinking about it from a consumer-centric business and regulating AI from that eye, you need to ensure, as Lerato said, around the ethical guidelines. But I think another key starting point coming from the way we've been looking at our frameworks for open finances, you need a firm policy stance from government. And the question now is, who is it? Is it the Department of Education? Is it the Department of Innovation? Who is it? Is it National Treasury? Who is the one who's going to develop the policy stance on AI for South Africa? And that raises a lot of questions.
It does. I understand that you're doing a lot of research into AI at the moment.
Yes.
Can you speak to what the FSCA is focusing on and what you're trying to get out of it?
Yes, so we're currently doing a landscaping study on AI in finance for South Africa. And we're hoping by the middle of this month that we will launch our survey for the whole financial sector. So this will include all the segments from banks, lenders, insurers, pensions, payments, and who am I forgetting? Basically all and fintechs and the technology providers. And from this survey, we'll get to understand how much they're investing in fintech, how much they think will be invested in all of South Africa, and also the models they use, the kind of foundational models they also use. And all of that information will go into our analysis of AI adoption and other information within the country. And we're hoping from that paper to understand just the landscape, then we'll take it further, hopefully, to understand more deeper things around costs and cost implications and adoption and so on of specific types of models. And this is the foundational study. We're working with the Prudential Authority on writing the study, and we'll be working very closely with them as we continue.
Okay. Would you be working with the IFWG at any stage? It feels like a cross-regulatory.
No, that's why we're working with the Prudential Authority.
Okay.
And yeah, that's the cross-regulatory, but not with the IFWG. Yeah.
All right, let's pick on Shanice. So for you, how is PASA adapting to the current digital blockers for the majority of South Africans? It's a bit of a tough one. What structural changes are being made, and how are you working with the SAB to evolve this to be in line with the 2025 vision of financial inclusion?
That is a tough question, but in our primary role, what we do is ensure that you have optionality. And that's the one key thing about being a consumer, and the key impact is you should have the optionality to choose how you pay. And we make sure that you've got the standards, the rules, the interoperability in play that makes that whole ecosystem happen. So our core focus right now is looking at the modernization efforts. I've heard today that somebody's in support of ISO 8583. So for me, it's modernization of standards, ISO 222, looking at data-rich messaging, looking at information that can be leveraged across different ecosystems. So we are creating that interoperability across payment rails and giving those options to customers.
They're also reforming PASA structurally.
Structurally into the PIB.
Yeah.
A little bit about the PIB in that case. So PASA, at this present moment, our members are the banks. And as we move forward into the PIB construct, we are now looking at expanding the entire ecosystem of that. So we have the banks that will be coming in, as well as a lot of the non-bank players in different capacities, through whether they're fintechs, whether they're MNOs, whether they're retailers. The objective in the long-term goal is to eventually bring the voice of all of the people in the payment sector together to inform decisions to create change in our payment system.
That's pretty cool. We're excited. So there is word out that through the planned curriculum, you're gonna love this one. Teachable Ps may have access to clearing and settlement facilities directly with SAMOS. Do you think that this is a great achievement for the 2025 vision? Are there risks present? Do you think the consumer is in mind for that decision?
I'm in two minds about that particular one, and this is a personal Shanice view. I'm in two minds because first thing that it does in this ecosystem like that, where you're inviting non-banks into the space where you have direct access to clearing and settlement, you are in effect leveling the playing field. You are removing a layer of complexity, and you are removing the requirement to have a sponsorship relationship to have direct access into the payment system. What it also opens the opportunity to do is for larger collaborations. Whereas while you are limited to bank partnerships, in the future you could partner with other fintechs. You can partner with MNOs. So it creates a lot more competition, and it allows for a lot more direct access. However, we cannot, and I'm more talking to the audience of this where we're looking at teachable Ps, cannot ignore the fact that all of this regulation and all of these things come with a lot more regulatory burden. You will also need to increase your compliance requirements. There are a lot more to meet. There are pre-funding requirements for your accounts. There would be a lot of significant IT infrastructure changes. There would be a lot more of your team that you would need to increase. And so it does, at the end of the day, while it could reduce the costs for a lot of the teachable Ps, it could also not in those respects. So I think it's up to each individual teachable P to do their own cost-benefit analysis to understand what it means for them.
Lerato, do you have any opinions on this?
I'm just trying to think of a way to phrase this. So I think it has its benefits. I think one of the risks one of the considerations that really needs to be front of mind at the moment is the entities who are currently or who currently have direct access to the payment system have quite heavy prudential requirements placed on them. And you in the room would need to seriously think about whether you are willing to take on those prudential requirements. Because they're not light. I think that's my main concern. They're not light. Also, we're talking about prudential requirements, but there are other requirements where the justification for those requirements is the safety of the financial system. Because once you start talking about having direct access to the payment system, you're now talking about systemic risk. Yeah. And systemic risk effectively is the risk of our financial system crashing. So for me, yes, it is a good thing. It will level the playing field, but you seriously do need to think about, are you willing to take on those prudential requirements?
So a lot of paperwork as a barrier to entry and then monitoring.
A lot of paperwork and a lot of accounting, because you need to be able to show that you have sufficient liquidity to be a part of the payment system.
I think that's the entire principle behind having pre-funded settlement accounts, is that you would have to make sure that that is pre-funded. It would not work the same as in a banking environment. Yeah. So you would have to have increased liquidity requirements placed on you to even participate in that structure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's an incredibly exciting endeavor, but again, it'll be useful to some, not useful to others. And I think the cool thing about the SARB is that they're quite collaborative, so you can approach them and say, this is our business model, does it make sense? And I'm sure that they'd be happy to say, probably not, but you can try. Cool, so just touching on the 56% of payments on cash. Do you guys think that there's going to be an eradication of cash? And what can fintechs do to kind of bring cash into a digital economy? Hint, Bitch has a cash product.
I'll start. I know I'm in a room full of TPPs and fintechs because I have not heard the phrase yet, cash is king. And it is. And I like it best as SEV has put it. We need to stop thinking about eradicating cash. We need to start creating cash and. And cash and effectively says, we're not getting rid of cash. But what can we do to help those customers that do rely on cash? And the nature of being in a fintech means you are tech savvy, you are agile, you have consumer-driven products that you can do in a much shorter span of time. And you should leverage that advantage to enable the cash and economy.
Like Stitch.
Like Stitch.
Okay, I think we were running out of time. Did we get an extension? No. All right, so I think with the cash product, one of the highlights for me and one of the biggest uses was that you're banking the unbanked in a slightly weird roundabout way, right? You're giving people access to credit where you can see that they're possibly repaying loans. So if you're a cash-based business, the customers of the cash-based business, they're able to track steady loan repayments and possibly approach credit providers and request access to really, really necessary credit. Do you think that these products are in line with what the SARB wants? Is this something that the SARB is looking at? Credit by any chance?
I think any products that allow consumers the ability to have a financial footprint would be welcomed. Right, so if we look at what financial or the different elements of financial inclusion, the main thing is about every citizen having a financial footprint. The converse to that, when we look at fintechs, it's about every consumer having a digital footprint. I think where fintechs can come in is, for me, I struggle to figure out how will we deal with all those individuals who currently don't have a digital footprint and who rely on cash. And speaking to, because I speak to a lot of startup fintechs who are addressing the township economy. Their main gripe is you have to solve for the whole ecosystem. So the moment that person wakes up and leaves their house and catches the taxi and gets to school and goes to the tuck shop and pays school fees and leaves the school and walks around, you have to literally innovate for every step of that consumer's journey if you want to deal with the cash issue. You can't just solve for one point. You have to think of the whole ecosystem of that individual.
It's interesting because one of from the IFWG on the regulatory guidance unit, one innovator approached us with a plan for having an app to pay for taxis. And I thought this is really cool because it's so practical for the people on the ground who prefer to use cash, because this could transform their lives and make it so much easier that they can just pay for a taxi using their phone or using that app. So we see some quite interesting cases even in the IFWG, because a lot of innovators submit to us through the regulatory guidance unit, seeking our regulatory advice on how they can comply with the law, and through our sandbox where they want to test their products. Thanks.
Cool. So speaking of complying, we're out of time. I think I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Does anyone have any questions for our esteemed regulators up here?
Thanks, Kat. Yes, Sam from Binance, but nothing crypto-related. So I think it's a very interesting point on cash, given that I think we are aware that, I think it was Aldo in the previous panel discussion, one of the pillars of cash in South Africa is the taxi industry. Now, I think Nolwazi makes the example of the use of different payment mechanisms. But at the same time, not really changing the ecosystem, right? Because I literally grew up in the industry. And one of the biggest problems is, for example, it's cash coming back into the ecosystem, enabling owners to pay workers, enabling owners to pay for various things that the vehicles need. And then importantly, what we haven't seen, probably an innovation point, is how you're linking cash to lending. That is the real incentive in the taxi industry. It's not really the utilization of cash. But if you're able to link it to lending, ensuring that it's able to service or incentivize lending facilities, that's probably a mechanism of driving the cash, the need for cash down. But I think to the point I think Shanice made, it's a question of cash and as opposed to cash or. Yeah, just an observation.
I think you're absolutely right, and the SARB has acknowledged this in many aspects. The key one right now being obviously Vision 2035 now, but more than that, the digital financial ID, where the core objective of that is to include not just people that are easily documented, but also the entire informal economy of South Africa that might struggle to prove their address, for example, or anything like that. And the core purpose behind that is to allow them access into the formal financial sector. And the fintechs have an opportunity to now look at that and create products for those people that would now come into the formal financial sector.
56%. I think that's the consumer. A lot of us are thinking about the other 31%. Something to think about. I just want to say thank you so much to you guys for lending your time to us today. It's been an incredible session. We're incredibly grateful, and I think most of the people in the room are as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.